Hey guys, welcome to Coast Property Buyers. I'm here with Simon Thomas for episode 4 of Buyer Hacks. So today let's have a bit of a chat about appraising properties, going in with some information that assists our buyers and some of the tools that we use when doing so. So in particular, let's drill down on comparable properties and comparable market analysis, Simon.
It's a great idea. I think that most people would approach a property. First and foremost, we want to tick the box that we like it and we want to buy it. Where to from here? We're guided by the sales agent. We've been following the market closely enough to say that the one around the corner was kind of similar, not exactly, and it sold for X. So how do you determine value? So that's what this video is about.
Absolutely. So I've had the opportunity to bid at 3 auctions in the past 4 weeks. So when it's time to bid at auction, price due diligence becomes a very important aspect of our service to our buyers. So when we're going to bid, we do have an auction strategy in how we're going to approach it, and that does include whether or not we're opening the bid, whether we're sitting tight and hold, whether we're going to be a smoky. There's a few different aspects of it, but most importantly, we want to protect our buyers from overpaying. So when we do bid at auction, we have an authorised bidding value of which we can go to, and once we get to that level, we simply discontinue bidding. So the way that we do that with a high level of confidence is inside market knowledge with plenty of data to support it. However, the data doesn't always reflect pound for pound, like for like. So there was an auction that I bid at in Batinia recently, and there was a very, very similar property which had sold for $105,000 less than what the auction that we went and bid at sold for. So that was made up of a few different elements. One in particular was the available living courtyard. One was a balcony, one was a courtyard, positioning within the complex as well. The same thing happened with an auction that I bid at last weekend, which we were successful with. There was a very similar under roof as a floor area, similar configuration in the same apartment, in the same complex, and through the thorough price due diligence that we carried out, we're able to get a bit of an idea in regards to how it was inferior or superior. And as it turned out, the positioning of the property that we bought was in a far superior position within the same complex. So if somebody just looked at comparable sales, here's a 4.2 and 2, under roof is 179. Well, this one's the same, where in fact they were at completely different ends of the complex. One was very quiet with an outlook. The other was at the other end, very noisy,
What's the
orientation, and had no outlook. They were looking out onto a building. So when people choose to go and inspect a property, particularly if they don't have any reference point or they haven't gone and inspected any properties recently within that complex, then the information that they're provided is by the selling agent. The selling agent's job is to maximize the price, of course. So when it comes time to appraising a property, we do utilize similar tools or the same tools as what a selling agent does. And these are paid software subscriptions in which if you choose to, you can pay to use them as well. And they will give you some data reference points which you can use for a CMA.
Just before we move on to how we look at comparable sales, it's fair to point, Jase has just been mentioning data in relation to units in complexes. And it's fair to say that when we compare units, certainly units within the same complex, those comparables are very, very similar.
They're pretty accurate.
But we can also look at a 2-bed, 1-bath unit in Mooloolaba and compare it to other unit complexes in Mooloolaba and or Maroochydore and or Alexandra Headland, for example. They're not going to be quite as comparable, but units within the same complex, very comparable, depending on what level they're on, whether they've got a courtyard, whether they've got a balcony, whether they're north facing, west facing, etc. As Jay said, what's under roof in terms of livable space. But when we talk about homes, it's a completely different conversation because we're talking about land content, of course, orientation, age of the house, improvements like sheds and or pools in particular, livable space, living areas internally, numbers of bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. So we try and do like for like as close as we can. But comparable sales, back to what you were talking about before, Jase, I think it's important for our audience to understand is what are properly comparables and why do they matter?
Yeah. So even within hotspots such as Cotton Tree, they've done a CMA on a property that we explored to purchase on behalf of a client, which was on level 4, and on level 7, the price is double. The question is always there, it's only a few floors down. However, the approved building zoning will actually go and surpass level 4 and 5. So those particular views that they have will eventually be taken away. Once you go up a couple of levels, you're no longer restricted to that. So if you're just using comparables in that sense, these are exactly the same identical properties and both ocean facing.
The other question is probably a question only the buyer can answer. For example, what's a view worth? Some people see an ocean view as being top tier. Others prefer maybe a bush backdrop or a bush view or a mountain view or a landscape view as opposed to an ocean view, but that's a subjective point of view. Do you want to have a chat about the data that we use and the difference between low confidence and high confidence?
Absolutely.
I think that's really important. So when we're looking at one of the tools that Jase mentioned, when we are exploring a property for a client and they say, look, we'll give it the green light, guys, we want to have a crack at this one. We want you to formulate an offer for us. So the first thing we look at is value. So obviously we're submitting an offer subject to certain conditions being met, but in order to come up with a figure, we use certain tools. And one of those tools is RP Data. So RP Data is a tool that real estate agents, buyers agents, banks and valuers use. Property managers can also use it for an estimation on a property, on a rental or a return on a property. But pretty much it's a very, and Price Finder is another one, which it's a very important tool that all of the above, including us, use on a daily basis. It's a touch point, it's a first reference point. It might be for exact land size when there's no land size available online or whatever it might be, but there's lots of really important data in there that we can draw on, but we're talking about values today. So when RP Data come up with a relative figure, which is an estimated value, it's an estimate, it's a guide, they come up with what they call a low estimate, they come up with a high estimate, and they come up with a mid-range or median estimate as to where they think the value is. But within that, they have low, medium, and high confidence. That just means the amount of comparable data that was available at that point of time. That might change in a week, it might change in a month, it'll certainly change in 3 or 4 months when there's a new quarter that's rolled around and all that data's been uploaded. But it's relevant as you look at it that day. So I've seen data change on a weekly basis on properties because that just means there's more data from other sales in the area that have actually been entered into that system.
There's always a bit of a lag time from going under contract to settling. So when we do a comparable market analysis, quite often we know of other properties that have recently gone under contract or that have gone unconditional but are yet to settle. So when we have a look, confidence level will be high. However, we're aware of additional data that's going to drop into that over the next 30, 60, 90 days. It's going to heavily affect that particular price point with high confidence. So outside of that, people do often refer back to realestate.com or domain and say, hey, it's actually got a price on it, so I'm going to go off of that. Unfortunately, with the non-paid subscriptions, they're very, very broad. What you can see is there's a unit on one side of the road and a house on the other side of the road, and it's doing a bit of an average across the board to say that here's a sale and here's another sale. So the average for this street for a property that's recently sold puts it at a particular price point. RP Data or CoreLogic, Price Finder, they're paid, so they're not free tools that are available. So it's got more reliable data that it can drill down on.
We submitted an offer on behalf of some clients on a property today, and I did some very thorough research for those clients yesterday and Saturday. And I did say to them from the outset, it's probably in one of the fastest growing and appreciating suburbs on the coast. It's an extremely popular suburb on the Sunshine Coast because it has been, up until till now, in the last maybe 6 months, an affordable suburb for a lot of people to look at. It's still affordable, but the price points have moved significantly in the last 6 months. So what I said to my clients who are interstate, I said, the comparables we're drawing down on, there's not been any comparables since November. So that doesn't include December, January, and even earlier. I mean, we're obviously recording this in early March, so no comparables for February. So this data is somewhat out of date.
Yes.
The market's actually moved since this data was entered.
Yep.
So when there's more data that goes into that particular algorithm, I believe that particular figure or that particular estimate on that property will improve about $60,000 to $70,000,
Yes.
which is significant.
Massive.
And they understood that. They say, so how are you arriving at price, Simon? So I've explained it to them, and we're very upfront. We're very transparent. Said these are the 3 numbers that RP Data are coming up with. We'll do a deeper dive ourselves and seeing what else we can actually use to throw in there to come up with a figure that we believe is a realistic figure. But I said this data is actually out of date for this property.
I've had a scenario where I did a CMA on behalf of a client, and there was very, very similar properties to draw down on. However, one was very basic finish, built for an investor. The other was owner occupied with high-end finish. Under roof was the same square meterage under roof. However, one had stone bench tops, floor to ceiling tiles in all of the wet areas. Butler's pet had a number of things that were actually superior. But if you looked at the two listings side by side, you'd think that they were an identical product. The buyer, and he regretfully announces this to me as well, we always have a bit of a chuckle. When I put the data together for him, he said, I couldn't believe that it would sell for that price. It sold for about 100 grand more than what he expected it to, and about 70,000 more than what we could have bought it for pre-market. So once he saw that that sold in a multiple offer, the agent did a great job. He went, oh my God, we could have bought that for 70 grand less. So whilst there's comparables, you need to drill a little bit further down. Even condition comes into play.
100%.
We've got like-for-like data to drill down on. You go to one and it's been an Airbnb its whole life. You go to the other that's owner-occupied, and they've really looked after the property, but any improvements they've needed to do, they've done. So they've got sheer curtains. They've updated the kitchen, the bathroom. They've done some updates and improved the property, therefore increasing its value. That won't be shown when it's just an auto scrape or an auto estimate.
The research we do, guys, it's certainly a deep dive as opposed to being surface level as far as a price analysis. So sometimes we'll ring an agent and say, look, we're really surprised this number has appeared on RP data. You seem to sell it very quickly. That's an unusual price. We would have thought it would have been worth more than that. They said that's pretty much land value.
Yeah,
there was no value in the improvements whatsoever. So often when it's land value, so there is an improvement on the property, there's improvements on the property, albeit dated, then you've got to realise that people will factor in, particularly if they're rebuilding, which in this case they were, there's a cost to actually removing the dwelling. Like it's $50,000 or $60,000 in addition to your stamp duty. We make the phone calls to the agents to get an understanding. So do we actually use this particular property as a comparable for this property? And in that case, no, we don't.
Yep.
Yeah, because it doesn't compare.
And then there's nuances within the industry in regards to different campaign strategies and different agencies, because we see on both ends of the spectrum a property that's advertised with a price guide and the property sells significantly higher than what that was priced as. Or on the other end of things, it's priced really, really high, and then buyers see that it's actually been sold for a much lower price.
Yeah.
So when we're carrying out price due diligence on behalf of our client, it's on behalf of the buyer. So it's not, the property has to be worth this, Simon, because I've got quite a large amount of debt, or the property needs to sell for this particular amount because there's another place that I've got interest in and I really need to get a good outcome. I'm seeing more listings that are, when they are priced, which isn't often, to be priced quite low, and they're achieving really, really big results.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a whole other video in terms of how properties are marketed by agents. And unfortunately, for a lot of the main portals, they do allow for agents to use something other than price. Auction is understandable, but in Queensland, obviously, if there's no price auction, they're not required to provide a guide. But with private treaty, it can be very frustrating.
Even let's just touch base on auctions and comparable market analysis. There's some auctions that you go to, the agents will freely let you know that whilst it's an auction and we can't provide you with a price, we can provide you with a comparable. Have a look at the comparable that they're providing.
Correct. Might be just a house in the street.
I was about to say the same thing.
It's a house in the street, therefore it compares to this house.
Yeah, yep. And it's a very recent sale. Great, explore it. We've had countless scenarios where I've appraised the property, my buyers have explored it, they've agreed that they'd be comfortable to purchase it at or below where the property is appraised from our due diligence. They've gone to the open home and the agent has said there's a recent comparable and it's significantly cheaper than where, or significantly lower than where we've appraised the property. It's like, oh, that's interesting that they're pricing that one. They'll watch the auction come and go and they'll see that the property sold for 300,000 more than the comparable that was provided. If we're bidding, and we have had this, we've put the two side by side. This is a 4-2-2 with a media room and a pool. The comparable that's being drawn down, and it's a 3-2-2 without a pool. So there's going to be a lot of people bidding at this auction that are going to be outbid quickly.
Yeah, so that's quite a detailed conversation to have. We can do that another time. Adjusting for land size, layout, condition and location, we kind of have touched on that. But land content, I was taught very early in my career, the values in your land, whatever improvements are on top of the land are the things that cost you money. So they're the things you either have to build or maintain or both. And land is obviously extremely rare, very hard commodity to find, although there have been some recent developments, new subdivisions that obviously our audience are aware of on the Sunshine Coast, albeit smaller parcels to get more people into the market. But land size is a massive one. And we know through our own research and through our own experience, there's certain block sizes in certain segments of certain suburbs of the market that you won't find. There's larger blocks because of the age of that particular suburb and when that suburb was developed. But land size is a massive one. Layout means how functional is the floor plan? Is there more than one living area? Is like a lot of the older homes, as I'm sure you're aware, that were built in the 50s and the 60s, it was one bathroom. That's what they did. They built a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom with a lock-up garage or a carport out the front. Some of those lock-up garages have since been converted into living spaces or bedrooms or additional bathrooms. But layout's a big one. Condition's something that Jase has talked about. So the condition of the home, that's massive. Has it been refurbished? Has it been renovated? What's the condition of the property? And location. Location, we mean suburb. We try and fit within a certain box when a client comes to us and say, this is what I would like. And we explore all of those parameters for that particular client. But after a period of time, we might say, for your budget, this is the quality of the property that we can find for you. Client might feel a bit underwhelmed. However, from here to here, which is suburb, you can buy a property that's in far better condition, probably on a bigger block of land. And it may be, for example, a little bit further away from the coast.
Or we get to know their brief a little bit more and find that the pocket that they've requested that we buy in won't actually provide good living for them. You know, we're people first, property second. So those that do allow us to be able to provide some local inside knowledge to them in regards to what it is that they're looking to achieve. I've had clients recently where they wanted to purchase in Buttram, wasn't going to be very quiet for them, wasn't going to be secluded, wasn't going to have the feel that they wanted to achieve, but had never explored Mons, introduced them to the suburb, and it's where they ended up buying. And that's happened from the beach, we don't want to be anywhere noisy, out to we want to be buying in the hinterland, but we don't want to be around snakes. Like, okay, there's some changes that need to let's see what we can achieve here.
Yeah, snake-free area, that would be awesome.
So when you're doing a hinterland purchase, 100 acres, the home's been relocated from Brisbane, how do you go about appraising a property? Utilizing data or comparable market analysis, recent sales? How do you guide a buyer through a process to put an offer on a property?
Yeah, it's a great question. Completely different process with doing resi. There's so much more value. For example, what's the difference between 20 acres, 50 acres, and 120 acres? Well, the difference is the size of the land, but it's also how much of that land's usable. I've looked at blocks that are 150 acres, 200 acres, and there's 20 acres usable. That suits the buyer. Sometimes no one want to graze 80% of it. Well, you can't because you can't clear it. It's obviously very dense vegetation. There's a cost to that. There's also an application to have that, you can't just go chopping trees down and neighbours are going to hear that there's a bit of activity and next thing you know, council are going to be knocking on your door saying what's going on. So it is a completely different process that we do follow. Improvements on acreage properties are certainly very important, but there's also things like not only houses, but also sheds, machinery sheds, storage sheds. The size of the house also comes into play, the condition of the house. Sometimes people will value, and we will value, a 20-acre parcel that is fully usable. It's 100% usable. It's all open. There's scattered trees, but that's about it. And you compare that to, say, 50 acres, and it's got 10 acres of usable land. And that might be as appealing or more appealing to a 20-acre buyer. So sometimes when we're talking to acreage clients, what is important to them? What are they actually buying the acreage for? We just want open fields and paddocks to look at, or maybe run a few cows. Or we like horses. We like to put a horse arena on the property or whatever it might be. But there's a massive difference between land content value with acreage as opposed to resi. Still as important, just a different process and a different price analysis that we use. And there's fencing, there's surface water, there's accessibility. I mean, I've bought a property myself recently and I went into that purchase knowing it could be flooded. the property can't be flooded because it's very high, but
You might get flooded in.
I might get flooded in or I might get flooded out. Might have to come and stay with you, Jase.
You've been hoping that you get flooded in ever since you bought
If
it.
I get flooded in.
Hasn't happened yet.
So yeah, that's important.
So you also take into consideration the type of grass, the
Pastures,
number of head of
weeds, lantana, camphor laurel, how much rubbish is on it. Again, the place I bought, it was covered in lantana and camphor laurel, which sounds amazing because it's all green, but it's pest and it overrides all the other natural timbers, which
Yep.
is not good. But accessibility, some of our clients say we want a sealed road to the door.
Yeah.
That's difficult with acreage properties.
Yeah, you don't see that a lot.
You don't see that a lot, no.
So do you utilize recent sales or comparable sales, and if so, how?
Yeah, really good question. So with acreage properties, you have to probably go outside of the time frame that allows you under a normal resi purchase.
Yep.
You can't say, okay, we need to look at comparable sales in the last 3 months. We do
Might
lean
not
on,
have been any.
and we really lean on agents. Like we would generally, when we're looking to analyse a price for a client on an acreage property, I very much lean on other agents. I probably make half a dozen to 10 phone calls, not just the agent that's looking to sell the property to us. What else? I'm trying to come up with a figure on these 120 acres in Timbuktu,
Yeah.
and it's got a nice home on it, needs a renovation. Are there any other? I've got these sales here, but these sales are like 6 to 12 months ago. Is there anything else? Yeah, we sold this one and this one. They just haven't settled yet.
Yep.
And this one sold for this one sold for that. I know the property you're talking about. We appraise it at this figure. So you just get all of this data from all of these other contacts
Yep.
and try and come up with a figure that you believe is realistic.
A market value for the property.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
That's a little bit challenging for your average buyer off the street because they obviously haven't built the relationship with the agents to be able to give them a call. But there's certainly a skill set that you've got.
Yeah, I really enjoy the acreage market. I think it's appealing for a certain number of people. Not everyone that moves to the Sunshine Coast wants to be on the beach. That's obviously a massive draw card. We're always going to be known as being a coastal market, but there's some beautiful real estate once you go out into the hinterland. There's some amazing properties that have sold for as nearly as high prices of what you see some of the top sales in the beachside suburbs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Phenomenal real estate.
And some spaces that are just as magical, if not more so.
Because, what I was saying earlier when Jase and I were talking about what value is there in a view, yes, ocean view is phenomenal. It's probably top tier. But for some people, the property we purchased last year, Jase, for a local client at Peachester, like when you sit on that front veranda and you look out, there's a valley leads down to the road. You can see where the driveway comes up. There's a set of cattle yards on your right. There's a shed to your right. There's a dam down the front. You can see cattle grazing. That's $1 million view for some people, or a multi-million-dollar view for some people. It's more appealing than an ocean view.
Sitting on the deck of the Old Story Bridge Hotel, it's pretty magical.
Having a cold cup
one.
of tea.
All the problems seem to wash away when that's the case.
100%.
Guys, that's everything for this week's podcast. If you need any assistance or would like to learn a little bit more around how to appraise a property, comparable market analysis, or some of the tools we use, please drop us a line. We're always here to help.
Thanks, guys. Catch you next time.